Welcome everybody. So I'm Martin Baxter, I'm Chief Policy Advisor at IEMA, and we're going to be talking about how we've used some of the value mapping tools that have been developed through the centre, which were being applied particularly and have been developed for manufacturing sector, and how we've been using them in IEMA for ourselves and tailoring them so that they can be used in the service sector. It's also worth saying, it's a real pleasure to be here because when the centre was established in 2010, I think it was, IEMA was one of the founder members, and we've been, it's been really good for us to be able to engage and participate in some of the work, support some of the programs, and in particular some of the dissemination. So that's been a really exciting thing to see from our perspective. A little bit about who we are and what we do. So IEMA is a membership body, so we're probably the largest professional body for environment and sustainability professionals in the world. We have about 14,000, 15,000 individuals who are working on environment and sustainability, and we have members in about 100 countries around the world. From our perspective, it's about giving people recognition for the skills and capability that they have. So we have programs that take people through to chartered status, providing support in terms of information, knowledge which they can use to become more effective in the work that they do. And then it's about using the power of the organisation and the professionals within it to influence the context within which they work. So whether that's working in policy development, contributing to the development of laws and regulations, or more broadly on an international stage on the development of global standards. I'll speak about that maybe a little bit later on. So for us as an organisation, we developed a new vision, which was transforming the world to sustainability. But of course, when you change a vision, in a way everything changes, but at that point nothing has changed. So unless you can have that vision running through the whole of the organisation, both in terms of who you are, what you do, the way in which you engage with people internally, the values that you have as an organisation, then nothing has really changed. And I think what the value mapping tools that we used were able to do was to take us and give us a much better understanding of how we create value for people in our organisation and within our membership and wider society. And that's been a really exciting programme which Ian has helped us to deliver. So with our new vision, we were looking at creating new membership standards, so expanding out from just environmental management to broader aspects of sustainability, so that can be issues like human rights, labour standards in supply chains, as well as human health related issues, particularly around impact assessment. And it's been about not just picking up the organisation and shifting it completely, but it's about stretching the scope and the boundary of what we do. So that's been quite a challenge. Within that, we're also applying to become a chartered body, which is quite an interesting process in its own right, quite arcane, but we would be governed under a completely new structure. We went through a new development of a new brand and identity, which you see evidence of today. And so where you see people in here, these are real people, these are individuals who are in IEMA's membership who've been used to sort of like project our new identity. And as well, we were looking at a new internal structure to deliver on that vision, a new management team that was in place. So quite a significant change for an organisation. And all of this came to culmination for a launch that we'd set on the 13th of June. So quite ambitious for a small organisation to go through a significant amount of change when you are an organisation that has a reasonable sort of like public view as well. So, so quite well known in sort of like environment sustainability circles and has quite a big profile. So what we had to understand was, in terms of going through all of this change, really have an understanding of, well, what is it that professionals really value? And how we were going to get through that process of understanding that and being able to speak to that as we went through this whole change process. And that's where Ian, who's one of our board members, fortuitously, was able to help us go through some processes internally using some of the tools that have been developed within the centre and adapting them for use in a different context, which was a service environment, and also to see how that would work as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Ian to give the gory details of how we got to where we got to.
Thank you, Martin. One of the fun things about sitting on a board is that you get to poke and prod the leadership team of organisations and ask them why they're doing things and challenge whether they're doing things as well or as effectively as you might like to think you would do if you were in their position. So back in December or possibly November of last year, we were having a board meeting and we were talking about the transition and the change and the things that were being planned for this year. And one of the questions that came up was, so do you know what your members really value about what it is you deliver to them? And there was a bit of a silence and a slightly embarrassed laugh. And the answer, which I've heard in many other circumstances as well, was, well, we think we know what some of the value is that they get from us, but we're not entirely sure that we really have a good understanding of it. And so I thought, well, this would be quite interesting. We have a set of value tools that look at value exchanges and business models, but we've only really applied them in the past to manufacturing companies. Now, IEMA couldn't in the remotest way be considered to be a manufacturing company, although some of their members clearly do sit in those companies. And I thought, well, it would be quite interesting to see what would happen if we applied these tools in a service environment. So we set off with their actually very strong agreement to try putting this in place. And we said, well, we'll take the standard approach that we run companies through when we take them through the tools and the facilitation. So we started off by meeting up with the leadership team in early December, and that was Martin, the chief executive, Tim Balcon, and two other gentlemen representing operations and finance. And we took them through our standard value mapping tool, which is this one here. And we took them through an exercise to ask them, first of all, who are your stakeholders? Let's actually spend some time digging into who it is that interacts with your business. And we use these tools in a fairly predictable way and start on that place because that allows us to have a really interesting debate around who are the people that you really ought to be thinking about when you're doing or trying to change things in your business. So they quickly identified that there were more and more different stakeholders than they had perhaps thought about previously, and we identified a really interesting network of people that they needed to be clear about their engagements with. And we went through the tool and identified some places. This tool specializes in looking at where value is captured, but importantly, where value is missed. So when you're exchanging value with different stakeholders, you're failing to do something that they would like you to do, or they're failing to deliver back to you something in return for the value that you're giving them. And I'm not going to talk about these tools in detail. So we ran through those two things, and the important thing about doing this with a leadership team is that they then can look at that and say, okay, if we're going to have a really good discussion, a really well facilitated engagement on this, who are the people that we need to have in the room? Which voices do we need to represent the views of the stakeholders that we really want to investigate? And so we were able then to sit down and go, okay, these are the stakeholders. They generally come from looking at that network, and therefore, who are the people that would be good to have in a facilitated workshop in order to really get into the understanding of that. So We completed that. They were very happy. They felt they had much more of an understanding. And very importantly, they knew that when we ran the workshop, they already knew what was going to happen to some extent in the first one. So there wouldn't be some huge surprises. And if we started to go off-piste in some way, they would know what to do to try and correct that, rather than perhaps have the team in the room run away in a direction that they were going to be really uncomfortable with. So we ran this in December. And then we ran the first of the workshops with their leadership team. So this was the whole leadership team, whole management team of IEMA. So we had people from IT, we had people from human resources, we had people from marketing, we had people who are representing all of the primary functions within the organization. And we started off and took them through the value mapping process. So looking at and, again, building that stakeholder network, which was very helpful. Then asking them to think about where value was being captured and not captured, and where from there opportunities arose. And they identified quite a wide range of challenges or successes in what they were thinking about at the moment. So we were looking at their membership services, how well those are working and how well they're going to be able to exchange value with their various stakeholders, not just their customers, but also the people that they value as partners in that business. So, for instance, there are a group of companies that deliver training services to their members. What would be the implication of making changes for those people? So we're able to dig into that and identify a number of different opportunities. I think there were, 34 opportunities that came out from that, looking at what and how they would be beneficial in the future. So we then ran the second part of this workshop. And normally, when we're doing this for a manufacturer, the second part of the workshop looks at life cycle value for products. So we're looking at how does value get exchanged across the life cycle of a product. Well, we realized in advance that might not work terribly well with a service, because there are some fundamental differences between the way in which a product runs through its life cycle and the way in which a service operates. It's very difficult to have end-of-life value recovered from a service, for instance. So we built a new tool for them that looked at the service process and the way in which the service engages with the customer or the key stakeholder that they wanted to look at. In this case, we looked at members. And for this, we divided them into two groups and looked at two different sorts of membership. So we looked at associate members and full members. So they took two different groups that they were changing the nature of the service they were going to offer, and we ran this process looking at how the service is offered to those people, what the elements are, how the services interact with those individuals, so at what points does it actually touch them, whether that's a physical human-to-human interaction or whether it's something to do with doing something on the website or receiving your bills or so on, and built an understanding of how the value exchanges are working and where value is being captured or missed or destroyed through that process. And we also looked at where and how information is being exchanged effectively or not. And we identified some really key things in this part. We identified that there was really poor differentiation between some of the services that were being offered. So if you were an entry-level member at IEMA and a fairly senior-level member, you might struggle to see the difference between what you were being offered. Doesn't mean there weren't things being offered differently, it just means that you might not be able to identify them yourself. And from that, we were able or they were able to recommend a whole load of different changes that they might make. So they went and said, what should we focus on? Identified the things that they really needed to work on, and we came back and ran a second workshop in much more detail that took them through the process of how do we then make those transformations? What is it that we need to do in order to understand who's going to make this change happen in our business, and what are the value propositions we're going to give to them so that they understand how and what makes it worth their while to change. So it persuades them to come on the journey. That allowed the building of a strong value proposition for those customers, and we ran this for 3 different types of engagement, so that we were building value propositions and offerings in different places. And I won't go into very much detail on this. This is the one that has nothing on it. The reason is this is where it gets very sensitive. In here is where you start to build the real benefits that are going to give you differentiation for your business. And often people don't really want that to be shared more widely than the boardroom or whoever else is engaged. So we then ran through the other elements of this process, which look at readiness for change, identify whether and how you can mitigate the risks that you're going to take on by trying to change your business, and build a detailed plan. And at the end of that, we had a detailed plan which enabled IEMA to go forward with more confidence into their membership review and relaunch. And at that point, I'll hand back to Martin.
Okay. What is interesting, of course, is that giving a non-exec the opportunity to come right into the heart of your organisation and dig around at will is actually quite a brave thing to do. And but we were happy to do that because what we knew we would do is generate a lot more value. So what did we do? Well, as part of this this change process that we've been going through, it's about being very, very clear about how we're going to move the organisation forward. So, we're going to be much more bright, open, and brave. So, bright in terms of visually being more stimulating, more about people, more about be more engaging. Open in terms of the way in which we talk to people. So very much more about having conversations, being more accessible as an organisation, really giving people the opportunity rather than to be told things, but actually to make a contribution as best as they can. And brave, because as an organisation, we've got a really good story to tell. We have influence not only at a national level, but also at an international level. But we don't tend to shout about that very much. We tend to be fairly self-reserved in this context. And actually, it's about shouting about things, because the agenda that we're involved in is about advocacy, it's about changing the boundaries. And we've got to be really bold about that and be able to mobilise a significant number of people and take them with us. So that's all about our leadership. So we developed new website, new structures, new ways of articulating both the skills that are needed for an organisation at different levels, speaking to the different membership levels that we have, making sure that we're going to be relevant to people, developing an interactive skills map for people with different parts of their own career journey, where you can start to have an understanding in terms of the skills and experience that you need, and actually start to develop your own career plan. And be then very clear about, well, what would this mean for you as an individual, what it might mean for an employer, how do you have to do that? So speaking very, very directly, in clear language, cluttering all the jargon that, is very, very easy for people in this space to get involved in. Because when you start to understand your stakeholders, for us, the key thing is the stakeholder the individual member, or is it the organisation that member is working in that derives the benefit from the skills of the individual that we are supporting? And when you start to work through that relationship, then you realize that we have to be speaking to employers far more about selling why this is, it's absolutely essential that you have these skills and capabilities in your organization. And so it's about, really articulating a positive message, a can-do. So there is a danger in our sector that we always talk about how difficult things are, what the challenges are, and not about what the achievements have been to make a significant progress on some of the big sustainability challenges. So that's the journey that we've been on. One of the things that we did find going through this process is that it's been really, really useful for breaking internal silos. So bringing people together to work collaboratively. What has been really helpful is the way in which we articulate our vision. I'm not going to go into it now, but everybody in the organisation can connect exactly the piece of work that they do, whether they're in IT, whether they're finance, whether they're leading in policy, working internationally on climate change. They know their contribution to that vision in terms of transforming the world to sustainability. What it's also allowed us to do is move from the generalizations that you have in an organisation to be far more granular in terms of how we might go both in terms of accessing markets, but also measuring performance and having a much deeper understanding of the very real differences that there are within the organisation in terms of the activities and the services that we're providing. And then being able to articulate that so that we are speaking to people as individuals and being able to develop multiple communication channels to enable us to be more effective. And I think when we went through this process in terms of building up to the changes that we were going through, we were able to sort of like demystify things. There was a concern that when you're going through a big change, are you able to take everybody with you? And what we found is by layering the communication and making it real to individual people, then that has really helped so that when we actually launched, all we've had is really positive messages. That isn't by accident, that was by design in the way in which we communicated all of the change. And also it talks about, how do you build a community of people to get people feeling part of something. And probably, what was really interesting when the result from the referendum came out, with 1 day's working notice, we were able to get 1,250 people of our members signed into a webinar on some of the legal implications for environment and sustainability on the Brexit, and get 2,700 downloads of that webinar in a 4-day period, because we're engaging people, we're talking with them in a relevant way, which matches and has a good understanding of the value that they might get from us as an organisation. So, successful, we launched, we have a new identity, and we've had very, very positive sort of outcomes as a result of that.